But I lost my pen yesterday. I was like, that's not
Explanations, have it.
Yeah, it's kind of hungry. I think this Saturday I'm driving to Eastleigh, so it's but so I've got my excuses. Use the electricity. You know how we cost the services?
That's new, isn't it? Up on the
it's just coming through.
I was like, now I've got
Yeah,
one.
that was it before. You said those.
I just had noticed that. Maybe we didn't have the door shut.
Yeah, that last one we did was really good. Steve asked a lot of questions.
Which one?
Little government.
He came back and said it was worthwhile, Steve.
When did it, you know? Keep my eyes, we've got time to use the councillors. Okay.
I've got Kelly online.
Yeah, she's going back twice on everything.
So I'll try and come back when I'm.
Looks like I'm the new mayor.
That's good. We were looking for change. You can have it, mate. Wait, I'll send all these emails.
That's sweet.
You've been training, right?
Somebody went to work.
Yeah.
Waikiki.
Someone's not late for breakfast.
Certain people that call me if they like go with me.
Oh, Martin's there.
We're paying, put on 6 kgs in 2 weeks.
For not training. Yeah, not training. Yeah,
Chocolate cake.
that happens because you start eating more.
Yeah, like 10,000 calories a day. You have the girth like mine.
I made you look like a messed up Jenny Craig. I remember one time we went to the Sweat, there was this huge guy there. We're not recording, no?
1 minute before the meeting starts.
And
they
then
can quote.
kia te taki papa. Kia ora mai, you messed off with Jenny Craig's Weight Watchers. I was like, oh, my, this guy's like 16.
Are we live recording yet or what? We've got from 10. Okay. Nice. You're ready to go? Okay, welcome everyone. It's 10 o'clock. It's the appointed time for the committee to start. I can see that we have a quorum here. I've had notice of an apology from Councillor Ann Court. I'd like to move from the chair that we provide her with leave of absence for this meeting. Do I have a seconder? John? All those in favour?
Aye.
Against Benny? Carried. You're quite right. I've got too keen. Who helps with a opening karakia?
Whakataka te hau ki te uru, whakataka te hau ki te tonga, kia mā kina kina ki uta, kia mā taratara ki tai ehe, a kia ana te ātakura, he teo he 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 tihei mauri ora.
Thank you. So, back into my stride again. I see we've got a couple of councillors online. Got Tamati and.
Good morning, Matty Radich.
Manny?
Hi, Maddie. Good to have you there.
Councillor
And Councillor Boyd.
And councillor Foy, I see you there. As you're not official members of the committee, are you wishing to speak on any of the matters? And we can then work through speaking rights and pass a appropriate motion to provide you with speaking rights. So I'd like to just move from chair that the three councillors online are provided with speaking rights at the committee, and just a reminder of raising matters that are directly in line with the agenda. I have no objections from the chair. Do we have a seconder for that? Well, thank you. All those in favour? Aye. Against if any? Carried. Okay, the other matter I just want to raise now, that I will be offshore for the next meeting and dialing in. Very hard to chair when you're in a remote situation. So I'm proposing that Deputy Chair John chairs that particular meeting. You're available to do that?
Yep.
In September. Thank you. Moving now on to item 4.
Are you there? You there, Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
Can I just bring up something before you start the meeting? It's to do with public exclusion. I noticed in the public exclusion, they got the Naku Whenu Trust on page 3, 12, I mean. And Mayor Moka was president at the time, and this has got nothing to do with the trust or the Secretary Des Mahoney, because I just looked back on my files way back to the year 2022, because this was brought up several weeks ago again, and it's been brought up again. And we made an agreement that anything that is discussed regarding the Carry Dam or the Naku Trust has to be open to the public. And we all agreed on that. And I see it's on public exclusion.
I might just, Carla, you're in the room. Do we have any legal privilege questions that we need to address on that matter?
There's nothing in this agenda for.
Well, isn't, what do you mean there's nothing? There's the Naku Trust. I'm just looking at it now.
And then you came back and then
On page 12.
It's been on every agenda for the past 4 years.
Yeah, but why don't we take it out of public exclusion?
That's a
That's
legal
what I
one.
want to see it.
Who is litigation?
Oh, okay. So it has
It will come
to be.
It will come off from that most recent email we've had, Councillor Ramage. We don't choose to put that on there.
So anything legal has to go to public exclusion with the Naku Trust. Is that correct?
Well, anything legal where we've taken advice needs to be in public exclusion, because otherwise we waive legal privilege, I think, and we've got our in-house counsel here. Are you able to provide some clarity?
Certainly, through the chair, Councillor Radich.
There's dramas in it.
That line item that you see there is on the legal liabilities report. That report just lists council's liabilities, particularly any litigation that it is currently facing. And at the moment, the trust is listed because they have an application against council for the cancellation of that Ford agreement. That's still there because that application is still live, and that the contents of that report remains in PX. It always has done, that particular report.
Yeah. In regard to that, did the trust get back to you on this?
Sorry, what was your question?
Point of order. I
Did-
think that should be X.
Yeah,
Did the
I
trust
think
get back? All right, where you go. Did the trust
We've
get
got-
back to you on this issue?
that would be part of legal privilege stuff for any discussions between the parties at this stage, so
Yeah.
really, if you've got a question in that area, the appropriate time will be under that agenda item, so you can maintain legal privilege and not be at risk of waiving it. So welcome to have the discussion of that point. Item 4.1, page 12, confirmation of the previous minutes.
Bit of move.
You're prepared. Details and any of the questions.
A few things that I can note, Mr. Chair. Given that it wasn't a part of the background here, but you'll note that the total fund per year is 20,000, and it had been exceeded for this financial year to the tune of 13,705 dollars. That is because when we found the budgetary allocations for the Miromiro discretionary fund, it's actually a 33,000. There was a $33,000 excess of unspent amounts that have just been sitting. We got overwhelmed with applications, so we're able to tap into that unspent allocation. So it's still unspent to the tune of about $20,000. And that's eventually is rolled over. The other thing too, you'll notice is, and for the public as well, who eventually watch this, is there are a number of international trips that the fund has contributed towards. That's because the fund is specifically there where applicants cannot apply to other council funds. Our community board fund excludes funding for any international trips. We've had a number of successful far northerners, especially youth, who have made it into international competitions and the like. I've been excited to be able to contribute towards the costs to see them go and represent us internationally from this fund.
Do we have any comments or questions from any?
Well, the mayor.
Yeah.
Answered my question. I think it's great, and I'm happy to approve this.
You there, Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
Yeah, I was a bit concerned about the mayoral funding. I went through for this, as some of you know, I've been involved in sport and coaching and all that at a very high level. And we never went to anyone for funding. We got off our backsides and fundraised. And I noticed in a few of these things where organisations where they could have done the same. And I noticed over the years with the community board, when they, when applications are in for funding and etc., a similar pattern forms where you get different sporting organisations or whatever organisation is, they just apply to the community board or apply to the mayor. He'll give us some money, etc. We don't have to do anything. And I think we should be very, very, very strong on this. Very strong indeed. It's you know, as I go through this, I just shake my head. There's nothing like running a raffle, running a beef raffle or something like that. You know, but today, sports coaches, managers, etc., they look at a similar way, very simple way, and yeah, it disappoints me in some ways. In regard to the Mirror, you know, giving money to different organisations, which they should have got off their backsides and did the fundraisings themselves. Thank you.
It's a mayoral discretionary fund, so I'm sure our mayor has heard those comments and no doubt was considering have people tapped into all the appropriate resources, but you might have some comments just briefly.
I'm happy to share direct applications with any members that are seeing those in the decision-making framework that I employ to approve funding. But noted.
Want to make a comment?
Yes.
Through the chair, Councillor Radish, I actually think if you look at the different numbers here, the column of actual grants made versus the projects, most of these initiatives are schools, community groups doing fundraising in the community, and they also come to the mayor for contributions to those fundraising efforts. And a good example is the travel and accommodation costs for under 16 rugby team to travel and participate in a tournament in Australia. It's a $40,000 project. The Mayoral Fund has contributed $2,500. I imagine the rest of those funds were actually raised in the community, probably at Bunnings, at Sausage Sizzles and raffles and all the rest of it. So I think the communities are maintaining their that community focus in terms of clubbing together and working together to raise funds.
Yeah, the point is, Guy, has these organisations been asked, have you done fundraising? You know, I'll just bring you up an instance.
Councillor Radish,
1987. No,
I see the application and approve it, and they put it all in there, or I ask, or they come crying to my office or saying, do you think, is there any other way that, or often they don't actually ask for funding, but they come and see me to ask what avenues I'm aware of that could help them with the initiatives, or even just to let me know that they've made it through. And then I'm always happy to say, hey, guess what could you get from another contribution here? Or actually, we've got a mayoral discretionary fund. We happen to have quite a bit of money left over from it. And we can give a contribution in this space so that rather than actually that entire weekend that you're going to have to go out and fundraise now, maybe you guys can train so you can bring back a trophy for us. So don't worry, Councillor Radish, I go through every single application and apply probably a stricter lens than the one that you yourself have to every single group that comes to the mayoral discretionary fund for any funding that we have.
Thank you, Mayor.
Councillor Boyd's got a question. She's put a lot on.
Oh, yes. The hand is sitting right on the joint of the screen, so I haven't picked that up. My apologies. Councillor Foy.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, as per my question in the chat, it was just a point of process, really. The matter of the applicants has in this report notes that it's removed for privacy, and I'm not sure why that is, because all of the applications for funding through the community board or any funding given from the council is always given as public information because it's public funds being provided. So just a question about that and transparency of ratepayer funds and why that was done in that way as part of this paper.
Could I perhaps just refer that to?
Well, some of the applicants are under the age of 18. Also, some of the applicants are applying because they are on their ass. Sorry, I'm trying to figure. It's incredibly, they're financial hardship. And the last thing, they're not even going to ask if it means their name's going to be plastered out there for the whole world to see that they're in incredible strife. So it's easier to apply lens of withdrawing the names for every single applicant to the mayoral discretionary fund, which is a tiny fund compared to our community board funds and the like, which are for open and public and transparent events. But we can get further advice to this if we are incorrectly applying privacy elements to this.
It was something that came from this committee, asking for those names to be
I
redacted.
think the first one, we had all the names on there and got in trouble for it.
Yeah,
So maybe if we could refer that to our council legal team, just to clarify both the community board and this fund as to what we should be disclosing and what we shouldn't. Is that feasible to do a short memo just as guidance?
Yes, certainly.
Yeah, just one other comment, Chair. Yeah, as I see Guy pointed out, some of these things, for example, there's one here that's discretion was 1/20th of the actual cost, so I'm sure they were fundraising. But I just want to note, just point out, so it's pretty clear, this is a mayoral discretionary fund. It's up to the mayor, he's showing discretion, and so we should be trusting him.
oh, look, exactly.
The point is, Mr. Chairman, we are very lazy. Simple.
I assure you, I'm probably the least laziest person on this council, Councillor Radich, and I am not being lazy when I perform my function as mayor and how I apply this mayoral discretion.
$33,000 and $122 million budget. I think we should move on.
Yeah, and if, one more thing is, if you want to have oversight over the fund, then you can always run for the mayor. Sure.
You can have it.
No further comment?
No.
The recommendation is that the Miromiro Assurance Risk and Finance Committee receive mayoral discretionary fund. Do I have a mover for that? Deputy Mayor Strader. John. All those in favour?
Aye.
Against, if any? Carried. 5.2, Council Financial Report. Angie and Jonathan, you'll come up and join us at the table, so it's easy for us to see you. And I'll hand the floor to you to talk to your report.
Apologies, we've got a number of staff in the team actually away at the moment, so I'll be standing in for a few reports today. So with the item 5.2 on page 22, this is the standard council financial reports, a standard item. We report it on a basis, noting of course that for this one, it reports through to year to date through to May, with June being the year end or financial year end, which runs through quite a different process for year end audit and annual report. I will cover off a broader summary, given that we've got quite a full agenda today, and take the more detail as read. Looking through on page 25 of the pack, it provides the financial overview. From this, you can see there that we've got a surplus there of 5.8 million. When looking at that, at its two key components, we've got income of around 167 million and expenses of 161.8. If we look at that income and how council looks at that, we break that down into one, the operating component, and also the capital component as well. Within the packet details a little bit more on the controllable costs in there, particularly the operational. And from that perspective, we're tracking our income at 70.5 million compared to quite a low budget. It notes in there 26.9 million. But as we've touched on in prior reports and in prior committees as well, there is a timing element there with the roading budget, where they've lumped all of the roading budget into the month of June. So we'll see quite a bit of a catch up for the roading space and indeed income in the month of June. With the other items of note within the income side, where we're seeing quite a bit more increase within the other income. It's currently sitting at 6.5 million compared to the budget of 1. So we're actually quite a way up from there, and that's largely driven by one, operational grants, 3 waters, better off funding, which is helping boost a lot more of that other space. The other notable point in there is around the fees and charges, where we are also seeing quite a bit higher fees and charges come through, currently sitting at 19.7 million compared to a budget of 18.4. So summarising those aspects, we'll likely see a leveling up next month with that budget sitting there. Initial forecast estimates indicate that our total income will actually be higher than budget, mainly due to those slightly higher fees and charges. From the expense side, as mentioned, we're sitting at 161.8 million. If we strip out the depreciation components and the interest components and look at that core operating expenditure, we're sitting at around 109.7 million. That is again similar to the income. It's actually up quite a bit versus the budget. Again, with the roading, their full year budget for their contractor fees is sitting in the month of June. So we'll see quite a bit of catch up next month in that space as well. With that, we're currently actually sitting at 40.7 million for contractor fees. The total full year budget is 37.5 million. So even though we'll see a catch up next month, we're still going to be over in that regard. Now, part of the offsets that we'll also see there will be things like payroll, which you can see is sitting at 4 million below budget. And that's just due to the larger number of vacants that we've had over the course of this year and have slowly caught up as the years progressed. We've also got lower professional fees, currently tracking about $2.5 million lower than our budget in that space, and also slightly lower grants and donations. The remaining of the report really outlines some of those key points and dives into a bit more detail of those, but again, conscious of time. So I'm happy to pause the overview there and see if there is any particular questions.
Any questions from committee members?
Transfer stations over budget 950,000, and it says illegal dumping. Nice expensive dump. Is it worth running an amnesty or something? Easy to have them dump it on the site you need it dumped on. The other question was ground maintenance. Did we forget to include some properties that need mowing or something? It's 557. Yeah, sure.
Back to you on that one.
And you've got highlights on page 31 and the housing for the elderly upgrade project progressed ahead of budget. What works that? Is that general maintenance or getting probably fit for occupation? So I thought we had that on a bit of a hold.
My understanding is that a number of the more material capital works there are on hold pending the work that's going on. I believe there's a workshop next week that will go into that in more detail.
The last one was remedial works, emergency events in May, June, anniversary weekend 2023. Is that recoverable under the emergency work funding?
Through the chair,
Capital.
this is for capital. On which page is that?
Page 7 of your report, 32 of the agenda. What the third little dot down under roading is over budget due to. Is that what you're talking about before? That'll be sorted in June when payments are coming.
Oh, yes, absolutely.
Right.
My page number is slightly out of kilter from that.
Yeah.
Any other questions from councillors?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman. Can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Yeah, I'm a bit disappointed there wasn't a financial report on the Sweetwater Aquifer, the progress financially on that project. Do you know why, Guy, or?
Through the chair, I'm just going to ask Group Manager of Corporate Services to update us on that. There's been some work going on in preparing that report. I think it's still in process.
Through the chair, thank you, Guy. So the financial report has been pulled together. We've obviously, as you're aware, it spans multiple years and there's a lot of financial information that needs to go into that. To provide the context as well, we are working with the infrastructure team to get the history and making sure that we actually are able to paint an appropriate picture on how the funds have been applied over that period. And I believe the appropriate forum to table that would be in the infrastructure committee, as opposed to art. So we look forward to tabling that at the next meeting.
So that'll be done next week, Charlie.
I'll check my calendar next month. Yeah.
Now, what worries me, Mr. Chairman, in 2022, $10 million was spent. That's huge. On what?
Personally have the numbers at hand, but Joey, if you come forward so you're within the camera range, that would be great.
Try to hide up here, Graham. Thank you. Through the chair, we are focusing on the period of this financial year currently, and when we do need to do a deep dive in some of the historical expenditure, we'll make sure that we do it appropriately in terms of providing all of the relevant context for that project. So if that is something which needs to be tabled at the TCOPA meeting, we will bring it up.
So in summary, you are still making sure that the fact pattern and timings and everything are all well and truly documented, validated before sort of potentially taking it back to the infrastructure committee for a view on where to from here. Sounds to me to be an appropriate avenue, as they'll be the committee that's over things, but ultimately if it looks like it's going to turn into a risk or an issue, then ultimately this committee should be kept appraised. I think we're all aware that the Sweetwater project hasn't gone perhaps as well as it might have, but we do need to make sure we're well grounded before we look at where to from here.
So what's the next step, Mr. Chairman? Because money, just before we carry on, money is just being spent.
To
Just out of the
report.
sky. And no one's worrying about it.
The next steps are being set out that it's to get the fact pattern correct, and it's going to be reported to the infrastructure committee as early next month.
Yeah, I need to check my calendar in terms of the date, the 20th.
20th, so that's 3.5 weeks away.
We're also
Okay.
to this. So it's
Right, very good. Very good, Mr. Chairman. Next, in 3.5 weeks, we should have a report. That'll be interesting. Thank you.
Yes. See, Councillor Foy's got a hand up. Is it on this topic or something else?
I've just written in the chat the context of my question. Can you see the chat, Mr. Chair?
Yes, I can. As I squint.
My question. Sorry, so just to save your eyes there, my question relates to the contractors and professional fees, and it has been highlighted with our CEO and with our finance staff that would like a separation of budgets for contractors and professional fees into separate allocations for elected members to review as part of our approval of budgets. Currently, they're lumped into one large heading with a giant budget allocation for both lumped in together. And as you can see from this report, which is refreshing to see that it's delineated between the two, As part of the report, it does note though the significant increase in professional fees. I'll note as well that it does give reasons underneath it. For example, the resource consents, it notes that why it's over budget and using external contractors. And then, but what I'm trying to highlight is the way that council approved budgets as part of both our long-term plan and our financial planning hasn't been broken down in order for us to decide if we're to allocate those and approve those costs or not. I'm not sure if other councils that you have a background with, Mr. Chair, delineate those, but that has been tabled with staff. And I think this report highlights the fact that internally that gives the ability to move between buckets, the contractors and professional fees for must-haves like the contractors, or for potentially nice to haves with professional fees that could be done in-house, but have chosen to be done externally because the budget has been available. So that's the main thing I wanted to highlight there. Thank you.
Certainly, your point is well made. There's often a trade-off between having staff availability and having to use professional external contractors, particularly in consenting areas and other such areas. As we've highlighted on page 28, we have a large number of staff vacancies there, and we've got staff-related cost savings of $4.4 million. Don't have enough information here to see the difference, but I imagine there is some level of correlation between the use of professional contractors and the lack of availability of staff. Other councils are noticed that the environment is changing and they're able to fill many of those vacancies over the last 3 to 6 months. Has been a move and therefore a drop in the need for external contractors. But our CEO may have some comments.
Just briefly, these numbers are symptomatic of issues that came, I think, primarily from the restructure that was done in April 2023, where we lost a lot of staff. We had very high staff turnover, something like 22% of our total staff turnover for last year. I think that has created some bad habits that we are endeavouring to put right. We're now back up to a full complement of staff, and we're definitely focused on spending, external consultants. We want to use less of them. And in terms of reporting the stuff, I also want to see greater detail for you all in terms of the reporting on staff numbers and external contractors being used, etc. So that will be tracked by each business across the council and reported against budget. So these are all some of the things that we'll endeavour to increase transparency and granularity for you all as we evolve this financial reporting. And obviously we have a workshop, bearing in mind that you should all feel welcome to make comments even in advance. Jonathan, I think you're running with that project. So what's the date of the workshops?
The 30th next week.
Okay. So any wish list items, it'd be quite good if you can get those through to Jonathan perhaps in advance. But I'm really looking forward to seeing some good outputs from that workshop, and that will shape our financial reporting going forward. So I think there's lots of room for improvement there.
Mr. Chair. Yeah, just comment. So just looking, it just really, it's probably directed at the CEO, and I understand that there's been quite a bit of turmoil and changes and everything, but obviously what would concern anybody in looking at its governance is the significant variation that exists between the operational and including this CapEx as well, and even budget. So with the lack of an asset management system, I'm hoping that by dealing with that, fixing that, our capital works, an example of that is page 31, where we say over budget, this is just an example, over budget, due to the installation of supercritical ultraviolet and replacement of urethane tank. I would presume that with, so correct me if I'm wrong, that with a good asset management, you will know the replacement due will be noted in advance, so therefore we can actually better get our budgeting right. I'm not saying none of this should be done. What I'm saying is that the reporting to the capital expenditure, less surprises rather than 170% over budget. And likewise, the same applies to the operational expenditure, in that we can be tighter. And one other question on page 33 about the great rights for the cycle trail as unbudgeted. Yet we have an MOU agreement in place, which several years, that shouldn't be unbudgeted. So I think there's various things that we can actually tidy up. Mr. CEO, can you respond to my thoughts there?
I would make my answer a 5, agree strongly. So yes, this is all part of the work that's being undertaken, certainly in asset management, procuring an asset management system that's all been specified. We're going to be working very hard to ascertain, once again, waters and infrastructure, ascertain condition of our assets, and then we can start pulling together all of life plans for the cost of maintaining those assets or replacing those assets. And that should flow through to far more accurate reporting, greater ability to report on costs and set realistic budgets.
Thank you. Councillor McNally.
Just a question on your spreadsheets, capital spend analysis. Roading and footpath shows and I just wonder if it's going to be caught up, as you suggested earlier. It shows a carry forward of 27 million in the top line there, capital spend analysis. And it shows actual versus budget. I realise this is the end of May, but 58.6%. So we're about 41% still to spend. Is that all just catch up because of the way the contracts are written, or is it a multi-year project?
Through the chair, when you look also at the second column there, it notes the commitments, which is the effectively open POs, which are invoices yet to be paid. When you take commitments into account, it actually boosts up to around 85, 86%. Actually, what I said on page 47.
Yeah,
still highlights that one from a rating perspective, they're looking not too bad from a total capital execution, but some of the other areas are a little bit lower in those areas.
I see that infrastructure asset management totals about 70, is that 25% overall? And the other question was the page before that, I think, analysis of controllable, page 45. Under the operational expenditure, what happens to the repairs and maintenance subsidy if it's not spent? Carried forward or we lose it?
From an operational expenditure standpoint, if it's not started, generally we don't carry it forward unless we're specifically requested to.
So the subsidy be lost. From an LTP changeover as well.
If it can be carried forward and it's material enough, then we can look at that. So.
Okay.
So can you just clarify that can look at versus should be looking at that as a standard? I wouldn't want this to be out of the norm, because I would expect that we would be ensuring that we're always trying to keep our subsidy.
I guess I'm just trying to highlight the importance of work programs and how critical it is to make sure we've got a forward work program. We're into week 4. I know that a lot of it is underway, the planning and what have you, but there's a massive opportunity to lose a lot of money. I'm going to change my format of work, where's the work.
Deputy Stratford.
Thank you. The loans that we have to pay, I'm noting some of them are due within the next 6 months. I think we're looking at 72 million in a year. How comfortable are we that we're going to be able to fund paying back? Are we redrawing, or what's the plan with the loan?
With that one, which I think is on
Page 41.
we've got a number of refinancing that's coming up. One, mostly in November, we've got a good chunk that's coming through.
Hang on, sorry, you guys, I really can't hear. Thank you.
At this stage, there's nothing here that influences any concern around refinancing. We have quite a sufficient debt ceiling that we can look at. More so, if anything, in and around that timing, our latest advice from our Treasury advisors, Bancorp, would be to actually conduct a wee bit of a review of our debt terms of structuring at that point. You know, we're starting to see a stage in the cycle where our interest rates are starting to come down. We've been in a wee bit of a holding pattern where we've actually, when we've refinanced quite short based on Bancorp's advice. And that's basically because we were expecting interest rates to start coming down. What we're hoping to is, hopefully, we will get a little bit of interest rate easing between now and that point, in which case, when those refinancing come up, we will start to look at a broader term, say, okay, well, what actually makes sense around what kind of construction? Because we don't want to lump it too much together. We want to make sure that it's nice and smooth through the cycle, but also pick out what is a really good cost of funds from our side of things as well. So to answer your question, we'll look at refinancing. There wouldn't be any concerns at this stage around that. And more so, we'll probably look at our total terms across our.
Excellent. Thank you. And in the ledgers, there's some, back and forth, but something that stood out for me was the Kitty on page 38, Kitty Library renewals and Proctor Library refresh, which should be the same thing. So are those movements in and out of the ledger fixing up that terminology? You can get back to me on that, John. And then the other one in the ledger was on page 38, Waipapa Sports Hub, remove capital grant incorrectly loaded. It'd be really good to know what grant.
I can follow up on that one. I suspect it was, as it's mentioned here, an incorrect entry around PGF, which is probably repaired, which has come up in this table.
Yeah, we didn't do a grant, but we did get PGF funding. Thank you.
Before I come across to Councillor Foy, the question, we have a Treasury policy where Bancorp giving us advice, and other councils there, and it may aid the understanding. There is Bancorp reports or extracts from them with the hedging profile and what we're trying to do within policy between the sort of bands and where we're sitting within the bands. Maybe going forward, we might be able to get some of that information. They also have quite a useful economic commentary that they place in their reports, which may be of use to councillors to help consider and get a risk profile, why we might be sitting towards one band or other edge of the bandings within the Treasury policy. So thought about that. On page 42, we should, as a committee, be noting treasury compliance there within our net debt and liquidity. Because those are important covenants that we have with LGFA. I might have a few other comments coming, but I'll cut across to Councillor Foy, who's noted there that she had one more question about insurance costs, which I think's very timely, as I've been having some discussions with executives on that very topic and what's happening in the market. I'm seeing at other councils. Councillor Foy.
Thank you. It was first just a positive remark, and just to thank Charlie and his staff, or maybe Tanya and her staff, for that table about capital spend analysis. In my last comment, I queried the lack of information about contractors and professional fees and not having that transparency, but previously we'd asked about the capital spend and to include the carry forwards plus the LTP budgets as a total budget. And now we have that as part of our standard reporting. So a big thank you there for that. So there's always some positives there. And I think it really makes it transparent about the total amount of work done and the total budget. So lastly was that matter about the interest costs under operational expenditures. It was just noted that variance in the cost and how much it has increased. The cost of insurance is substantial. And I know that our GM for Finance, Charlie, has been looking at that and how we can potentially address that. So I was just wanting further information about insurance as a risk to our council and the escalating costs of that.
What I can respond on some of those points, what I've seen at other councils is that the ability to get insurance, professional indemnity insurance, particularly for Building Act compliance issues, has dropped significantly, with one major player dropping out of the market, from what I can gather. And therefore there's been a sort of a club put together of a number of councils, I think it's 17 from memory, but the limit is then shared between them, which does pose some significant potential risks. And I'm yet to finish that discussion with Charlie and our chief executive beside me on what's happening out there and what they're seeing in the market. So there's been a lot of tightening. The cost of that insurance has gone up dramatically, some cases close to 300% just in recent weeks. So that is something we should be aware of, that potentially our costs and may exceed the budgets in those areas, and there may be restrictions on the cover available. So that's just a general looking at the horizon and what might be coming towards us. We've got any other comments on this particular report? In which case, the 5.2, the Council Financial Report, the recommendation is that the Miromiro Assurance Risk and Finance Committee receive the Council Financial Report for the period ended 31 May 2024. Do I have a mover? Deputy Mayor Stratford. Councillor Panutuli. Any other comment before I place the motion? All those in favour? Aye. Against, if any? Carried. Moving on to 5.3 on page 48. Progress in waste and policies update. Again, I think Jonathan, you'll remain in the hot seat.
You've got me for the next two reports, unfortunately. Thank you. This paper is guided from the Miromiro work plan and looks to provide key updates on instances of fraud or misappropriation of assets, material changes of fraud and process control. It also just touches on some of the upcoming audit focus that will start to come through, and notes any aspects in there around some of the continuous improvement activities that we're also embarking on within council. The aim of it is really just to maintain that good transparency, that accountability, integrity of what we do. Looking through at some of the fraud and misappropriation of assets component, pleased to say that from internal review, we can confirm that there's no material instances of fraud or misappropriation of assets over the last financial year. There's been some minor instances of misuse of vehicles, but again, that's more so understanding of what's for a purpose as opposed to anything material worth noting. From changes in fraud processes and controls, we haven't had any significant changes in that space, other than any updates based on audit recommendations from the last audit, which have been reported through to this committee previously. Looking ahead at our audit focus areas. So our audit team is actually due to start its audit next week. And with that, they will then start to provide further updates to this committee as to how that audit starts to progress. They're going to have quite a key focus on a number of areas in this upcoming audit, particularly around policy procedures, around expenses and procurement practices. They're also going to be looking at the controls or management's ability to override controls. And as part of that, they're going to be doing a lot of sampling and sanity checking on various different journals, the various controls, testing those to ensure that they are fit for purpose. In addition to that, they'll obviously be focusing on some of the accounting estimates as part of the annual report, looking at any material assumptions and judgments that are put forward, and start to also look at some of the significant or unusual transactions, stuff which is not our everyday. As part of this, and also as part of this paper, there will be a fraud assessment survey that will be passed through to elected members as well as part of that. So again, as part of that audit, they're going to be asking on your lens and probably also for the chair's lens as well around thoughts in and around fraud. So again, I'll be reaching out accordingly and happy to assist with that as that comes through as part of the focus. The next piece in there just touches on a few initiatives or more material initiatives that from a continuous improvement standpoint. The one there on page 49 being FSure, which is an integrated system that actually looks at a risk management solution for payments. So it actually works in with our accounts payable, reduces payment risk, fraud and errors through a various set of processes there. Again, we're also standing up our procurement tender panel. So this is something which we once had and is now being reinstated. Part of the rationale for this is just providing more due diligence and I guess more oversight across key functions such as legal, finance, risk. Something that we once had, but again, it's just about standing and strengthening that process, particularly with audit coming. That's going to be something that we have a bit of focus on as well. Over the page on page 50, it also just touches on the two other initiatives that are currently underway. One being ProMap, which is a mapping software which has been regulated. That's really just to document and capture key processes and critical processes of council. I think one of the things that we've seen, particularly over this last year following the restructure that Guy mentioned, was with the loss of that experience, we're suddenly losing that knowledge on how to actually do some of these critical processes. And those key staff walk out the door. So again, this is in part trying to look at a consistent way in which we can capture that to ensure continuity and functionality. And the last one there just touches on Blackhawk. So currently we have E-Road in some of our fleet, but not all. In fact, across our fleet, I think we've got just over 80 odd vehicles. 29 of them have E-Road in them, the rest don't. So again, part of this aspect is looking at what's a fit for purpose product that can actually make greater sense for us so that we can get a much more holistic view around where our vehicles are, where our people are, and how they're being used. The offshoot to this is one, it has various different health and safety related benefits, but secondly, it also gives us the ability to start to look at utilisation more effectively, to start questioning whether that number of vehicles is the right number of vehicles, or whether we could reallocate and or reduce to save costs in the future. And the last piece of the report here just touches on some of the regular policy reviews that are going to be undertaken, or some of them are actually already in motion around some of the financial policies there, most of which have got minor updates, but again, it's a good process to just review to make sure that they are current. Pause there for any questions, please.
If you may.
Thank you. Just for some around this table, this might sound like a cracked record, but when it comes to fraud and your processes that you're going through, what mechanism do you have in that process to ensure that staff or elected members aren't being incentivised to choose option? Like a company paying $20,000 if elected members vote for, or not, or procure, staff on the procurement panel choose an option.
That's a better example. Through the chair, a number of mechanisms exist for that. One of which is conflict of interest, which again is an initial starting point to ensure that we keep council safe, but also everyone within council, both elected members and staff that have an interest. I mean, it is Northland. We all know everyone. So conflicts are part of the natural course of what we experience as part of working in New Zealand. It's not necessarily a bad thing. Sometimes it's a great thing. It's more so around making sure that it's appropriately disclosed so that we can manage it effectively to keep organisation safe, but also individuals. Outside of that, again, by reinstating procurement panel, it's going to add an additional layer or lens of oversight in there, rather than looking at a more directed type system. This is going to give greater visibility on those sorts of transactions. And lastly, with the fraud aspects, there is also a number of separation of duties and how we actually process and look at how expenditure comes through that cycle of receiving, who it's coming to, and how it's being paid, so that we get multiple layers. So through that separation of duties, it ensures that, well, it helps mitigate, I guess, a level where you might get a stronger influence of power, because then effectively you get these multiple people having to sign off on it and put their own integrity on the line and call out when something looks fishy, or call out when something is not fully explained, so that through that process it helps keep everyone a little bit more safe. But the only way of overcoming that more effectively is it means that you'd have to collude with multiple people across multiple layers of the organisation in order to successfully commit forward. So that's just top of my head. That's the key ones that have got top of mind, but there are a few other system related ones as well.
Graham, what do other councils do with fraud litigation? But that example that I used is something that does happen across local government. People get kickback to, influence decision making.
Perhaps some general comments and I'll cover that one on the way through because I have some notes in that area.
Yeah, and I do have one more question, but carry on.
I've had contact with the audit partner yesterday and he's confirmed there's nothing that at this stage that this committee needs to be aware of. However, we've agreed to keep open lines of communication across the period if anything comes up. And so at this stage, yeah, the audit's just starting. The F-Shore process is assisting. Will assist in making it harder for fraud to happen. Most of the fraud that happens in councils and most entities, in fact, is on the payment side. It's the highest risk area. And typically it is fake invoicing that's coming through that gets through the payment system. So this is another step that's going to make it a little more difficult. There is a product, excuse me, out there that does go looking for potential conflicts of interest by uploading supplier databases and staff and personnel details and councillor details, etc., and all the information that we've got, and it does a cross match on public record, and that will include things like proximity of addresses, known people, and is there a pattern there happening that might indicate something needs to be looked at, and some councils are using that on a periodic basis to go looking. And that's a product that I can provide details to. It's not particularly expensive to do, typically under $1,000 to get the run through. And at other councils I've been at, they've done it, they've actually found things like community board members with undeclared interests and bits and pieces. It's fair to say, purely oversight, but it's actually checked our own internal conflict process, excuse me. With regard to the Black Hawk GPS, yes, very useful for health and safety. One of the councils I'm involved in had an incident where Black Hawk was the saviour. As a remote worker that ended up having a rollover event, and Black Hawk actually triggered to actually get help out to them very promptly. So that was good product. It's something that's vital in health and safety. With the additional benefits of utilisation, what the fleet's doing and optimisation. Great to see the financial services policies being looked at. What would be useful for visibility is a one-page schedule of council policies and management policies. Just what they are, date they are, just single one line, when it's due for review, what the progress is, so we can keep an eye as a governance group that the policies are being reviewed without getting necessarily down and dirty into them. So it's just from a governance point of view. So that would be a useful add-in here. We're in tougher economic times, as everyone knows, and sometimes that causes reasonable people to do unreasonable things if they're starting to get squeezed. By the end of January, we'll have about 98% of the low rate mortgages will have rolled over. Typically what happens, the costs of servicing a mortgage go up, people use their reserves, and then they wonder what to do when the reserves run out. And unfortunately, it may force people into situations. There may be loss of a job for a spouse in the household or a person in the household. So we need to be at these times really aware of the risks of fraud. And I'm certainly available, given my other roles that I have, to have a chat about a few things that you might want to be doing with the exec team, and no doubt Jonathan, Charlie and the Chief Executive and I will have a brief discussion on that.
Graham, you mentioned that list of policies. You have previously asked for that in another meeting. So I'm wondering if maybe we need to start an action list for this committee.
Yep.
Because that was a couple meetings ago. Oh, Charlie. Okay.
I've taking notes, and we'll add this into the probity report next cycle. We'll have that list, that database added through.
Often it comes up at each meeting as a standing paper in the agenda, just for noting, not really for discussion, unless there's something that it reveals as not happening.
Would you be okay with this committee having an action sheet? We have it.
Very happy with that concept. Matters arising out of the minutes.
Yeah, and I can't remember which meeting it was exactly, but it was something.
I don't think it's the first time I've made the
No,
comment.
it's the third time that I've heard it.
It's one of my hardy annuals around various councils.
Yeah.
And it just needs to be a single A4 piece of paper, or maybe double-sided, just with noting the council policies that council needs to oversee and those that are delegated to the CE.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the team.
I had one more question on this.
Yes.
So in 50, it talks about the elected members' allowances and reimbursement policy. Yes, review, but don't forget that it needs to also go to the community board meeting, because
Our elected members.
yeah, they're elected members. Often we miss them out, and it has been to community boards previously.
Very valid point, thank you. My apologies, I didn't start my hay fever medications quite soon enough before coming up to the winter lift north. And in my part of the world, there's not a lot of pollen around at the moment. Any other comments? I'm just checking on screen, no one there. Any other councillors wish to make any comments? The recommendation is that the Te Miromiro Assurance Risk and Finance Committee see the report Poverty, Waste and Policies update. Do I have a mover?
Too late.
No,
Yeah, I am. I'll open it for discussion.
You have a mover, it's fine. Actually, I just have one question, was pertaining to the procurement tender panel reinstatement, and who the members of that panel would be. Would there be a mixture of elected members? Would it be?
I believe this is probably more a management function, so it'd be under the CE's direction.
We have, we
The
did.
guidelines between governance and management, the governance role is to set the policies and make sure it's all happening, but this is something really big. It's probable that council's going to have an understanding of it anyway.
So then it might be a thing that perhaps we bring in independence.
You may well wish to bring in specific expertise, particularly on major projects. It's not unusual to have a specialist on some really big projects, but this is more just making sure that the general process of tendering is an external extra set of eyes and panel looking at it to make sure that have you done this, have you done that, and is asking questions of staff. So I see it as an operational management process. Charlie, have you got any further comment on that one as director?
Thanks, Graham. The terms of reference are draft currently. I don't recall off the top of my head who the composition was, but it's looking at drawing on expertise across the organisation to make sure that you have a holistic view and adequate expertise to make an informed decision. I can come back to the committee with regard to whether that includes an elected member or not, or if we can then seek further feedback on including specific provisions in the contract for major contracts that we need specific expertise on as well. The intention is that once the committee, the tender panel is set up, it will report to ARC on an ongoing basis, so we have that transparency in terms of the operations.
Just before that question, I was in the process of asking for a move up and seconder. We have those. Thank you, councillors. Any further discussion? All those in favour? Any? Carried. Thank you. Moving on to 5.4 revenue recovery report. which is on page 51 of the pack. Now, I understand Zena's away. So Jonathan, you'll remain in that hot seat.
Yes. All right, so this is the, again, standing item. It just provides a latest update through to 30 June. Arrears balances, information on collecting key actions in regards to that, focusing on the rates for the sundry debt. On page 51, midway down, it kicks off with our general title rates, which on a year-to-year comparison basis, we've seen an increase of approximately 10% for general title rates, with water rates increasing by only 1%. The detail to that is seen in the table on page 54 of the pack, where you can see that year on year we've increased around 637,092 accounts, most of which is sitting in that mortgage run space, with some partial offset in the debt recovery action. So again, when speaking to Zena and my team prior to leave to get some more information in that space, what they're hearing across the group and the community in that space is the mortgage runs increasing because that's just all they can do. That's what they're seeing from that cost of living challenge, and that's sort of seen as a wee bit of a default in that regard. The debt recovery action is coming down mostly due to the increased work that they're doing and actually going out and actively engaging.
Excuse me, Jonathan, question from Councillor Foy, and I think it's a good one. There's a bit of jargon there, mortgage run. Can you just explain what you're meaning by mortgage run in your terminology?
So mortgage run is effectively where we will contact the major financiers around the rates that are owed, and depending on the different financier, they will either add it to the mortgage. It could go into overdraft, or they could actually pull out the funds from savings. In this case, a lot does end up going to mortgage. However, different financiers do take slightly different approaches.
Sorry, I interrupted you, Jonathan.
All good.
You were partway through. You had any other comments to make?
I think they are the key ones there for the rates on the water side. And as far as the actions in regards to general title rates and water debt, those mortgage demands with the financial institutions have now all been completed. And now the team is starting to focus on the new rating year, starting to look at the arrears that hold a mortgage and reviewing the legal action that's commenced with our external contractor, which is Law North. I'll skip ahead in the interest of time to page 52 and just touch on Māori freehold lands and water rates. Again, we're seeing a positive aspect here with a reduction in Māori freehold land debt by around 3% year on year, with water rates seeing decrease around 27%. Detail to that seen on the table on page 55, which again you can see that year on year is around 285,000 and decrease there in actual dollars terms, or roughly around 202 accounts. One note in there around some of the actions in this space, as reported in the Te Waka Committee. Again, we've got a new formed Whenua Māori Rating Relief Working Group, which is currently doing a bunch of work in this space. It's a cross-functional team of which I'm part of, and we're looking at a holistic approach around and cross-council and how we collaborate in the space to look at ways in which we can reduce debt levels, clarify information, and eliminate some of the barriers there. I know that more detail has been submitted through to the Te Waka committee previously. But again, it was thought that because this is a relatively new group, but also just touch on some of those aspects within this report as well, to show that there is a number of actions that are going through with this working group to help make some progress in this space. And lastly, just on page 53, we'll just touch on the sundry debtors. With this, the detail can be seen on page 57 of the report. What we're seeing within the sundry debt side is we've got an increase year on year. So we're up around 1.4 million year on year. If you look at the main reasons or drivers with that, we've got a good chunk in sundry. But when you dive into that, a lot of that is actually due to timing. You see in the top table, the 542,000. A huge chunk of that is due to June invoicing, which came through. So the debt's still current. If we rerun the report as of now, we actually see that number drop down quite substantially as people start to pay them. The other big ones in here, which are consistent with previous reports, is in and around building resource consent. And again, with those, what we're seeing there is a huge number of activity over the last year or so, which applications are coming through thick and fast. I think as noted previously as well, both of those teams, particularly the resource consent space, has had quite a period of under-resourcing. They had quite a large number there where they relied on external contractors to help fill the gap. We have now got a more fully staffed team, which is now starting to work in and address some of those applications, but it is quite a significant backlog and it is quite a sizable task. I'll pause there.
Thank you, Jonathan. There's a comment there through the chat from Councillor Helgard Harawira, and I fully endorse that comment to see that the Maori freehold land rates and water debt, 11% was for actually land remissions, and it's important that we're making sure that all the remissions and rebates, etc., that are available for all members of our community, whether they be because of low income and that sort of thing, that we are identifying those so that we know that our database is correct and our information of what's outstanding is actually not containing errors and omissions. So that is good to see that, because with that new piece of legislation, I say new, it's not that old. It takes a while to get your head around and make sure we've got all the right records.
Through the chair, just on that comment, one of the aspects that I agree that the legislation isn't new, but when it was enacted at pace. Certain assumptions had to be put through and process that. And part of what we're discovering now is how can we run another eye over those to ensure that the information that we've got is appropriate and what opportunities in there exist, that through cleaning up our data and getting more accurate with that information, it's allowing us to apply some more remissions and classify land more appropriately. And through that, we're seeing a number of benefits, one of which being a number of write-offs of debt which should have been written off, and it is now being refined more and more through this process, and with the oversight of this group working through it.
And ultimately never invoiced. So as a saying in the computer industry, garbage in, garbage out. So that's good to see it being cleansed. Any other comments from councillors or execs on the revenue recovery report? If not, I'll ask for a mover and seconder for the recommendation, which is that Te Miromiro assurance.
Oh, sorry. I just had a comment, if that's okay.
Councillor Foley.
Sorry, I've got my hand up. I just wanted to know on that matter about the recovery of debt. and they brought up, there was the matter raised about the resource consents. I have recognised there's been a huge effort, in particular within that department, that we've never had before about recovering that debt. But because the consents have to be reviewed by a technical professional, when there's been a request to review the fees under the Resource Management Act provisions, what's been happening historically is that instead of requiring the consent holder to pay all of the amount apart from the amount in dispute for those hours that are in dispute, the whole amount isn't paid. And so there's been huge amounts, as you can see in those tables there, of resource consent debt. I just wanted to ask Charlie and potentially some of the staff online if those methodologies for debt collection have changed to require those people that have the resource consents to pay all the funds outstanding apart from the hours in dispute, or what methodology has been taken so that we can get more cash flow within that department.
Is that something, Jonathan or Charlie? Do you want to stand up so that you come
Through the
within
chair, Trish Rutley.
maybe come within camera range would be good for those online.
Through the chair, thank you. Trish Rutley's our team lead in this area. I believe has a hand up to speak to the topic.
Thanks, Trish.
Kia ora, kia ora. Kia ora Mayor, kia ora Chief Executive, kia ora elected members, kia ora committee members. Thank you, Phyllis, Councillor Foy, for your question. We recently discovered that policy wasn't being enacted, so now we are asking people who object to their fee under section 357B let us know exactly what part of the fee that they're disputing and then pay the undisputed amount. So you're correct, that wasn't being applied. But in fact, a lot of that revenue recovery debt is debt of people that haven't objected. So they haven't objected at all. So they're just debt. Does that make sense?
Thank you for that. Comment from other councils that I'm involved in. Very similar to what you were saying, and some of the people have applied for consents, and with economic times, they've decided not to pick them up, and therefore the council's left financing their consent work. And they'll eventually, when they decide to go ahead with the project, they'll then pay the invoice and pick up the consent. Is that happening in this council?
100% happening. Sorry, excuse me. I think it's really important that we have really strong debt recovery policy to collect these unpaid consents, because otherwise the ratepayers are actually financing the developers' developments, particularly if the subdivisions, but they're all crying poor and not wanting to pay their debt. But unfortunately, due to that high influx of applications in the last 2022 kind of period prior to the proposed district plan being proposed, because we were short-staffed, we relied heavily on contractors, and I think a lot of the invoices weren't being vetted correctly, so the consultants were overcharging. So, you know, even though they didn't object under 357B, they probably have fair reason to query their fee objection. But I believe revenue recovery hadn't at that time got the 30, 60, 90-day policy in place. So those older debts, I'm not sure the revenue recovery team has a lot of luck kind of trying to collect. So I'm not quite sure how we approach that. New debt we can, but these older ones, I think it's slightly more difficult, and Charlie could probably talk to that better than me.
Charlie's just coming into view.
Through the chair, thanks for that, Trish. So from what I understand, when you do have someone who's applied for a resource consent and incurred a cost from council, we treat it in the same manner that we would with any other debt, in terms of those recovery options, to the extent that the debt is allocated against a person as opposed to a property. So the right of recourse that we have, or the recourse options, are limited. And it is something that we should probably have a look at and discuss with other councils, because we won't be alone facing this issue. I will discuss that with Jonathan, and perhaps we can come back to Miromiro with the output of that conversation.
Just ask our Minister Secretary to add that to the follow-up list.
Thank you.
Any other comments on the revenue recovery report? Not, I'll look for a mover and seconder of the recommendation that the Miromiro Insurance Risk and Finance Committee receive the revenue recovery as at 30 June 2024. You're happy to move, Councillor Erdrich? Seconder? Yep. Mayor, okay. I'll put the motion if there's no further discussion. All those in favour? Right. Against? Carried. Yes, certainly, because you had a phone call that you needed to dive out on.
Correct.
So our CE's just got a comment back on item 5.3, which is the probity, waste and policies update.
Yeah, thank you. And through the chair, apologies, I left the meeting for a phone call. Just wanted to make a couple of observations on this general area, and really start by saying that I was astounded by a recent meeting I was in with the project management office, where I was informed that the procurement panel had been stood down, and that was in May 2022. The previous chief executive stood down that process without consultation to staff or elected members. I found that quite concerning. The message to the project management office is that we will stand back up our procurement panels, tender panels, and more than that, that they will have a roving mandate to go wherever they choose to go in council and query and quiz people about their procurement processes. So I'm looking to have that area tightened up considerably. I believe our procurement moved to direct awards procurements of something like 85% of our procurement being done by direct awards recently. So I just to note that in this committee, I find that practice unsettling. It's not good practice, and we're putting an end to it. I've also had conversations with our group manager of corporate services about creating a role for it. So we'll create a new position for an internal auditor. And once again, that is just to chase down any issues or concerns that we have. And I think that's in the current economic climate, that's a prudent thing to do. But I also think we need to tighten up a lot of things where there is, and certainly there's ample opportunity for some corrupt practices to be present. So we just need to be very vigilant for that. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Can I just comment, like in terms of the oversight management of the actual committee, Mr. CEO, can we make a recommendation, maybe not here, but to discuss that? Perhaps we have independent people on that panel, and that's built around people with robust experience, expertise, because of what we're talking about here is ensuring that we're not, we're introducing mechanisms and processes to ensure that we're not encountering fraud or people who are already within the organisation on the procurement team. So perhaps we reach out to those in Whānau Holdings and some of our subsidiaries, especially those who've got the skill sets and understand project management, procurement, tendering processes, and we reach out to them, put them on the panel.
So I think so what we're talking about setting up is a tender panels for our procurement. we have the expertise in-house for that. That would then get reported up to the Short Risk and Finance Committee. So I'm not sure I'm seeing the need for external people in that process.
But if the people that you've got in-house are associated with the organisation that's tendering contracts and procuring expertise, then it makes sense to get outside assistance and independent people. It's almost like I mean, we do have the expertise in-house, but I feel that there's also significant expertise outside of this organisation that won't see things the same way that this organisation sees them, and provides a different perspective and a point of view.
What we do is we set up policies and procedures for procurement and for having tender panels for procuring services. I think that the policies and the procedures are what are important here, but Charlie Billington has commented.
I did hear from him before regarding the terms of reference, which is, I think the terms of reference should come to this committee.
Yep.
And then this committee should ultimately determine what those terms of references are. After they're drafted, we'll give you centralise it with this committee. Then we'll provide the feedback and the conditions of what we want implemented into those terms of references, so that this oversight committee, the tendering procurement panel, consists of the right ingredients and the ingredients that we as the elected members of this region want.
Through the chair, thank you. Absolutely agree. The terms of reference should come to the committee for input, and where we have specific requirements to engage additional services beyond that, the council recognises that it has in-house and will potentially incur additional costs to do. We need to make sure that the goals and the objectives of the committee are well thought out and adhered to, and on an ongoing basis we can make sure that we can demonstrate that once that terms of reference is set up and the feedback's been received and backed into that, we're able to report to the committee on how it's been.
Yes, I also think in your terms of reference, when you provide the draft, that draft should consist of iwi appointments. Those appointments should be appointments put forward by the iwi conglomerate, which is the Kaho Tānui, whether it's one or two, and then those people will be representing on that panel the interests of the Māori people in the region, who are well over 50% of the region.
Just some comments about what I've seen elsewhere is that independent or outside management is really usually only done for major contracts that are not business as usual contracts. If they're on a major project that's very large capex or is not the normal sort of day-to-day. But managing the projects themselves tends to be it's really under the delegation to the CE, who then gets his team together, and we need to be careful we're not confusing governance and management roles and working out where it is. If there is a contract going out that it is appropriate to get consultation and with iwi, etc., that should be happening as part of the normal project.
No, I don't agree.
I
don't agree. I believe that this committee here is the committee that ultimately will inform the rules of engagement through the terms of reference as to the people who will make up their board. Yes, it will be to the CEO's discretion, but ultimately that terms of reference will be an opportunity for these elected members to clearly illustrate and outline what the expectations are and the direction that we expect the organisation to follow.
That's probably sits within the procurement policy.
No.
There, as opposed to an oversight committee, which I think is what CE is putting forward.
I think over time, this council has had elected members sit on a procurement panel. So I think we need to add this to that workshop, perhaps. Discuss it there. Appetite. And the things that I saw when that panel happened were delays because there were elected members not able to get to those. So sometimes they didn't even have elected members turn up at the procurement panel hui. And so decisions were being made without them.
Mr. Chair. I was actually one of those on that.
It's John's fault.
Yeah, I do know that they were concerned, especially with COVID and some of the there was delays in the process. But I know darn well that there were delays in the meeting, so I do wonder where that's coming from. And I did get towards what the CE's comments were, because I was horrified. I did challenge a few things when there was direct awards. Whenever there was a direct award, I actually challenged it because that didn't really fit with our policy. So maybe it was my fault, but I think that's a fair challenge. But just picking up on what Councillor Kliskovich has raised, I think it's quite critical if we're standing this up again, and I don't want to go through a process where we're sort of finding our way. I'd like to actually have standing up a new procurement committee. I think it's vital that we actually get the expertise in there. We have who gave a presentation yesterday in the steering committee. We have a quite experienced person as a external engineer that we got, and I think involving people like that at the beginning to get that right and is critical, especially given the big contracts we have coming up in that whole area. So I'd like to see something in there happening as you propose to stand up.
See the shape of this proposal as it comes through. Certainly, you raised a good point, Graham, and it has been our practice that with the big contracts, solid waste, for example, we do actually bring in external advisors, procurement specialists. Let's be clear here. What we are trying to cut out here is this direct awards. People are just giving contracts to their friends or to contractors they like, and that's a concern for us because we see that with consultants when just certain names keep popping up, and there doesn't appear to have been any reality check on the value for money we're getting. So there'll be some clear objectives that will come out of this, and I'm not sure what the next steps are with getting the procurement, the tender panel stood up again. Charlie, is that?
Through the chair, thank you, guys. So the terms of reference we tabled to the CE for review, and then if the appropriate next step is to bring that through, we can either do a workshop on that and a compare and contrast to the panel that was run previously, and the thought process in terms of all of the mechanisms that are built in and what the proposal is. And then we can have a robust discussion around the way that that should be formatted before it's adopted. But as Guy said, it's, there's a lot of sort of additional control that we can add in the procurement process when we're engaging with contractors. And we need to consider all sorts of risks as a part of that process as well. And making sure that we do have relevant oversight as to how it's being constructed, where relevant experience that a council might not also possess is being engaged, but not tripping ourselves up in terms of the rhythm that needs to happen to make sure our procurement is happening fluidly, because the proposal currently is that the panel will meet every 2 weeks, and if there's a requirement to have people who may not be able to attend, it's just making sure that we're able to build in the appropriate sort of checks and mechanisms to not prohibit ourselves from engaged suppliers.
I think we can achieve a lot and still maintain fluency. We'll also create a mechanism to ensure the CEO can't scrap the tender panel unilaterally in the future. So
thank you. Thank you very much, Charlie. I don't want to be difficult. I'm just foreseeing what some issues may arise, and I'm thinking the power of the committee or their panel in the hands of a favoured few can lead, obviously, to alienating others, and then obviously if it's in the hands of too many, preventing too little progress. So just thinking about getting the balance right.
We'll make sure that we bring through the procurement policies to sort of make sure that all of the appropriate tools are being reviewed.
okay.
Hello, everyone. At this point, I think we have effectively worked our way through the public agenda, so it's now time to pass the resolution to move into public excluded. The resolution's in your papers, but I'll just read it out. The public be excluded from the following parts of proceedings of this meeting. Firstly, Far North District Council current legal action, potential liability claims. Secondly, risk of non-compliance, the Mataharora Directive to fluoridate water supplies at Kamatara and Kerikeri. Thirdly, confirmation of the previous minutes, public excluded. Fourthly, health, safety and wellbeing, May, June 24. Fifthly, risk management update. And lastly, Far North Holdings Limited financier change to LGFA. Do I have someone to move that? Here. Thank you. Second. Someone to my left. John, was it? Thank you. All those in favour?
Aye.
Against, opinion? We can take the recording off and new advice this week. There, and if we can have a check that everyone that is online is entitled to be here.